Welcome to the Innovation Shorts. This is the Coastal Helicopters room. Our first presenter is Ben Sanders, CEO and founder of Proof, and his presentation is titled Yukon Code Rush. Take it away, Ben.
Thanks, James. Is that coming through now? Perfect. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name's Ben, and I am the founder and CEO of a startup in Whitehorse called Proof. I'm going to be talking today about the Yukon Code Rush, but I want to start just by acknowledging that I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Taan, Quechan, and the Kwanladun First Nations here in Whitehorse, Yukon. And before I begin on the Code Rush, I just want to give you some quick context on me. I've been trying to cut red tape in government most of my adult life. And I worked as a page in the Canadian equivalent of the House of Representatives. I even ran for federal office here in Canada. What Proof is doing is we are replacing these paper-based routing slips in government to digitize the decision-making process with something that's much more digital, and we're working with governments at all levels across the country. Before building Proof, I helped build and launch two tech startups in Silicon Valley. The first was a tablet company for restaurants. These are in every Applebee's in the US, where you can order and pay without having to wait. And the second is ClearBank, the largest e-commerce investor in the world. When I moved to the Yukon, I helped to try and help grow the local tech economy here. I built robots with kids in every school across the Yukon. We ran hackathons with astronauts. We launched a balloon into space with the Yukon University. And we had a pizza party with 200 people in the middle of the winter to start up this idea called Yukonstruct, which is a makerspace here in the Yukon that's now grown into a full-blown innovation hub. So I've been involved in the local tech economy in a big way. The Yukon Code Rush is something that I think we ought to do next. And that's what I'm going to talk about now. Richard Florida is an author who wrote The Rise of the Creative Class, someone who's really inspired me for most of my adult life. And he recently said the future of economic development is talent. And I think that's really important. I think we're getting your audio, Tyler. So if you're able to mute, that would be great. Because I work in government, I'm fascinated by what Estonia is doing. They are competing for the world's top talent. I'm an e-resident of Estonia, and that means that without ever setting foot there, I can plug into the EU banking system. I can incorporate my business there. And so they're increasing their tax base without increasing their tax burden by having people remotely plug into Estonia. I think it's really cool and a sign of what's to come. Tulsa's doing some really interesting things where they've launched this program to encourage people to move to Tulsa. It launched in 2018. They've had over 12,000 people sign up, and 300 people have relocated there. They're giving people a $10,000 grant to come and be part of the local economy. The problem, here in the Yukon is that local talent, local entrepreneurs, they need more access to sustained mentorship. And ActDev locally wants to attract and grow more startups. Tourism, I think, needs to be more creative. And so that's why I'm proposing that we build a tech residency here. We need to attract the right kinds of workers, tech-oriented knowledge economy leaders who can work in the North remotely, because traditional immigration practices are outdated and only doing so much. Internet-based businesses have leveled the playing field, and COVID's been an accelerant, but we need to act now. Nurturing homegrown talent is an important piece of the puzzle, and we're doing some great work on that front, but I believe it's not enough. And we can only support a small organic rate of jobs growth here. If we can only support so many bakeries. I love bakeries, but I think that attracting more internet-based businesses in the North could be a way for us to grow the economy in a considerable bigger way. So it's the difference between kind of cultivating a garden from seeds or transplanting seedlings that are already evolved and can transplant faster and better. So what do I mean by this? How would it work? The idea is to have groups of small tech startups or internet-based businesses come up in a revolving way to the North. Every month, a new team comes up. And we would put them in a beautiful cabin like this. So they would have this amazing experience in the north. They'd be here for a month. Now that Starlink internet is becoming more available in the north, we can do this. This is actually a picture of my home out in the wilderness, the beautiful wilderness. And the idea is that they would build their businesses for most of the week and come in on Friday afternoons to help support local entrepreneurs through office hours. Now, this is something that we've already done. My last startup came up to the Yukon, and we did exactly this. They came up for 2 weeks. You'll remember this reference to earlier in my slides. That team, that's now over 200 people, came up to the Yukon when we were only 10. And they had a great time. It was such a strong impression that it left that 2 of us stayed, and we started Proof. And I think that's a really great example of the success of an early pilot for this. 3 others from those 10 became investors in our company, and Proof would not be based in the north had it not been for that experience. There are other examples of this in the Yukon, but more toward the arts. This is Pierre Burton's childhood home in Dawson. He's a famous author where there's now a writer's retreat where writers come up regularly and live in his space and do similar types of office hours with the local community. There's a number of other arts-related programs too. And Banff in Canada is a world-renowned similar version of this, also arts-oriented. And they attract some of the world's best artists to come to this space and to participate in a form of residency. I think that there's an opportunity for us in the north to do that in a digital, tech-enabled, internet-based business kind of way. The trick is, how do we attract that talent? How do we get the word out? I think we should leverage a playbook from Australia. In 2009, they launched this program called the Best Job in the World. And they had, essentially, it was to come and be the caretaker of the Great Barrier Reef for a year in Australia. They had 35,000 applications from 200 countries around the world, and more than $430 million in estimated PR value from a budget of only 1 million. Because it was such a fascinating idea, they leveraged the magic of their space as we could do with the North. People were very drawn to the idea. And for all of us, who have moved to the North from away, we know that powerful force once you're here. The trick is just getting more of those kind of people to get a taste for it and to come up. So this is how I think we could demonstrate that. This is an idea for a video that we could put out to get the word out, to attract some of these people to come to the North for this Yukon Code Rush. It starts with hands looking down at a keyboard, and it pans up to kind of a dingy, stale back alley in New York City, right? Especially at a time like this with COVID, people are boxed up. They haven't been out, right? This is a common scene for a lot of people in big cities. Next, hands down on a steering wheel, and as it pans up, kind of that terrible, frustrating, painful experience of being in big city traffic, stuck, right? Hands down, trying to buy something, and there's a big, long line, so kind of highlighting all of the pain points of working and living in a big city. And then suddenly things turn from kind of a muted color to something really vibrant. Hands down on this Air North flight. This is kind of like the one of the world's best airlines is based in the Yukon. We're really proud of that. And this pans up to show a beautiful, welcoming face and warm baked cookies on the plane. And next, what happens is you have the inverse of what we had before. Hands down riding a mountain bike, looking up at a beautiful scene. Hands down on a paddle, going through whitewater. Hands down, on climbing this wall to come over the peak on this beautiful summit. And then it closes with Northern Lights and pans down to that same computer screen. It says 100 years ago, we had the gold rush. Now it's time for the Yukon Code Rush. And if we did this right, I think that we could attract some incredible people to come up for a short-term stay, be part of the program, contribute beyond just a conference by holding regular weekly office hours with the same entrepreneurs over the course of a month. And then we switch it up for another group. And hopefully we would get more like Clearbank in the Yukon, where some of them would stay and build big businesses in the North, bringing their established businesses from away and contributing to the local economy here. I think, this is the way in which we can really make a big difference. And Africa is already doing this. Botswana is building a $60 million state-of-the-art facility. So we're behind the 8 ball. If we invested in tech in the North, imagine what we could do. And the time is now. Imagine what we'll miss out on if we don't act now. Thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Ben. We're not going to be doing questions for the shorts in these rooms, but if you have questions for the presenters, please go either find them on the networking wall or track them down during one of the networking breaks before and after the summit, and then one somewhere in the middle on each day. Next up, we have Emily Bell, Managing Director of Local First Colorado. And the title of her presentation is Fundraiser to Foodraiser, Supporting Food Businesses in a Pandemic.
Thanks, James, and thanks for having me, everybody. I think that was, painting a beautiful picture of up north, so I'm gonna have to find a way to get up there soon. And like James said, I'm from Local First, located here in La Plata County, Colorado. So we're actually a county-wide organization, not a statewide. I know you've heard from another Local First today, so I'll talk a little bit about that too. And today I'm really diving into how our organization has approached supporting our food businesses in this pandemic. All of us have had to pivot quite a bit, and our food businesses have been especially hard hit by that. So these are some of the ways that we were able to get creative and find ways to really funnel funding directly to them. And so first, I'll give a little overview of Local First. So we are a nonprofit alliance of locally owned independent businesses and organizations, other nonprofits. And our focus here is really on building an economy that values people, the planet, and prosperity for everyone. So that triple bottom line really runs through everything that we're doing. And in our community here, we're very much a mountain town, very tied to our outdoors and to our community being a community of about 30,000 folks. So all of this is very intertwined here, as it is everywhere. And to kind of talk about why this is an especially relevant industry for us, I wanted to give an overview of food in La Plata County. So here in, Durango is one of our larger cities here in our county, and in our region, we actually have the highest restaurants per capita in the country. So in the United States, we have one restaurant for every 99 residents, which is actually higher than San Francisco. There's sort of some competition that we have with them over this number. But, when you think about the scale of that, even though we are, 30,000 in our county, that's still a sizable portion of our businesses. We also have a food service industry that, as a result, employs almost 10% of our population. It's the third highest employing industry. And when we look at those numbers compared to the fact that 2 out of every 3 restaurant employees have been furloughed or laid off due to COVID, the economic impact of that is just multiplied when you look at the result of a pandemic and of the situation we've been in this past year. So we wanted to take a look, as we, kind of got our bearings around how we were going to approach the pandemic and our programming. We wanted to take a look at what was going on in our community. So I'm sure many of you can relate to this in your own towns, but we had, public health mandates and closures that were really significantly impacting our food service and hospitality businesses. So we knew that they had a high need in this moment, as all businesses did, but we knew it was especially hard for them. And we also knew that we had public health workers who were really strained to keep up with the demand for care. We knew that we had a really strong community of consumers and supporters who were eagerly searching for ways to support their favorite businesses. And we also knew that we're surrounded, our county and the surrounding counties have a robust number of farms and agriculture businesses that had all lost steady accounts because the businesses they normally worked with just had too much uncertainty to maintain those. So we were looking at how can we adapt to really meet those needs. And one of the ideas that we used actually came from San Francisco. So even though we have that competition over the restaurants per capita, we very much respect the work that they're doing over there. And we're so inspired by Feed the Frontlines. And we decided to adapt that to our own community. And if you haven't heard of Feed the Frontlines, it's a program that provides meals for healthcare workers by employing local businesses, local restaurants. So it's sort of, two birds, one stone. You're supporting the businesses, funneling, money directly to them, and you're getting meals to folks that have just been working constantly to help all of us survive this pandemic. And, it also involved the community. We were able to have donors and other businesses participate in this program. And so here in our community, that worked really well. We ended up having 20 to 30 restaurants. We did this twice. So once in the fall of 2020 and just now earlier this spring. And each time we had 20 to 30 restaurants who were, so excited to be able to give their employees work and have a steady account for, a period of time that they could kind of count on. We ended up with 326 individuals and businesses donating to this program. So, maybe it wasn't a food business, somebody who's doing really well was able to pitch into this program. We did 10,000 meals. So we worked with multiple healthcare partners, our local hospital, and some of our other regional clinics. And, in the end, that brought $140,000 directly to these food businesses. So when we think about the usage of our time putting that together and the community partnership that we were able to build, this absolutely paid off. And it's something that we're considering, doing again. We've done 2 rounds now. It's been really successful. And, if the uncertainty continues, this is a program that we know that we can fall back on and say, hey, restaurants, let's activate you. Healthcare workers, let's get you fed. And so I also wanted to talk about, kind of a slightly different model for a program. This is a picture from our harvest dinner, which in years past, I know this kind of looks like a stock photo, but it's actually, from 2019. And it was a really glamorous annual fundraiser that we would do, bringing 150 people together in person, under a tent outdoors, but still quite close and communal. And we would bring in 5 to 10 chefs and restaurants to prepare a multi-course meal, all with the point of connecting these participants to their local food so that they now know the face behind their local restaurant, or, the farmers were also involved so that they could get that sense of agriculture. And so, of course, something like this, while so cherished and, appreciated in our community, was not possible in 2020. So we looked at how we could adapt this. And what we ended up deciding on was expanding this into a full month of eat local activities. So we decided on, instead of just 1 meal, we would do 4 gourmet takeout meals. It was each Friday through September and into October, which enabled us to work with more food businesses. In the past, with this being a fundraiser, we had really had an immense amount of support from our businesses. And this year we were more than happy to return the favor. And, the folks that normally donated, we offered payment, and really wanted to emphasize that of, this is us helping you keep your employees at work and safe, so that this is, beneficial to the whole community. And then we would also do donations to nonprofits each week, with that ultimate goal of recirculating dollars into the community. Again, we have a community of supporters that really wanted to be participating and supporting their restaurants. And we just kind of had to give them something to channel that towards. And so this ended up working out really well. You can see one of my colleagues here who works for another nonprofit who helped us put these meals together. And it was 4 weeks of sustained business to these restaurants where they got something kind of fun and creative to do, and they were able to count on the number of meals that they would be making each week. It raised $13,000, recirculated it back into the community. And in the end, it was 35 businesses, 11 restaurants, 24 farms, and 7 nonprofits who all received funding from this. And so, I think for us, the main key takeaways here, as we're looking forward to 2021, which I think we're all optimistic, but there's still so much we don't know, was kind of looking at this in terms of assessing our community needs before we take any action. So even now, we're in the process of thinking through, could we do a harvest dinner again? Or do we want to do this, 4-week program? They both have their benefits. But we're looking at, where do we think we're going to be? And right now we're leaning towards, kind of that model where we're going to be able to create more economic stimulus for the community rather than throw just a pure fundraiser. And I think that was one of the biggest takeaways for me, is that our community is invested enough in our businesses and in our work. Everybody loves local. I think that's become even more apparent these days as we've all seen our local businesses close. So the idea that a fundraiser does not just have to be every business donating or doing in kind, it can also support them and generate revenue for them. So that's something we're thinking about moving forward. As we build on these models for 2021, we're looking at that multiplier effect. And we were really lucky to be able to show our community this impact. And we've actually secured a grant to be able to do our Eat Local Month programming next year or in 2021. So that means for us that we're going to be looking at how we can, expand to more restaurants or deepen the impact of what we're already doing. So thank you so much for having me, and I'll look forward to any questions if anyone wants to reach out. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Emily. Next up, we have Dr. Shelagh Rowles, Executive Director of Continuing Studies at Yukon University. And her presentation is titled Northern Innovation in Yukon's Construction Center.
Hey, everybody. I'm just pulling up the PowerPoint to share with you. And of course, it's disappeared for a minute. Hang on. Here we go. And share. Are you seeing the document?
You're not.
You're not? Okay. Darn. You know what? It's okay. It's not imperative. I'm just going to speak to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join this conversation. And although can't be physically in Juneau, which is a real tease, it's delightful to connect with Alaskan neighbors. And today I'm going to speak about the value of Northern innovation through the story of Yukon's construction sector. As you all know, we're in the midst of a technological revolution that drives social and economic change across most economic sectors around the globe. And other significant pressures, including climate change, the pandemic, global political uncertainty, can potentially undermine the progress and potential for Northern people to determine their social and economic future. Therefore, it's important now more than ever to foster and promote innovation that advances Northern needs and interests. And I'm framing this discussion using a social constructivist lens. And this means that I'm assuming that people and societies can shape their economic and social circumstances, including Northerners. Through a brief historical overview of the evolution of Yukon's construction sector, my talk highlights the importance for Northern businesses and governments to have the capacity to innovate. When people working in the construction sector can use and apply new building technologies, they can innovate to adapt construction practices that are suitable for Northern environments and for the specific needs of those occupying the buildings. And Northern innovation also establishes an important economic niche for local builders. Yukon's contemporary construction sector began with the construction of the Alaska Highway in the 1940s. American and Canadian personnel were moved to bases in Whitehorse with no housing available. And because people needed accommodation immediately, the government secured housing kits intended for southern environments that were unsuitable for Yukon's northern climate. Yet the decisions made then affect the quality of Yukon's housing stock after the highway was completed. For example, there were these houses called Estilox houses. They were initially intended to go to Florida and they were sent to Whitehorse, and they're particularly unsuitable. They have steel-clad outer walls, poor insulation, 10-foot high ceilings with the heating ducts up in the ceilings. And so they were nearly impossible to heat. Eventually, the units were sold to private homeowners, and some have been retrofitted but many of the Stelux housing units remain a testament to the unsuitability of importing southern housing solutions directly into the north with no modifications. And during the 1940s and 50s, the Canadian government invested in housing for Yukon's First Nation people as well. However, similar to the housing introduced in Whitehorse for government and military personnel, the housing wasn't well designed for northern living. First Nation people had little or no input into the housing provided to them, and it was all controlled, and the decisions were controlled by the federal government. For those of you that are familiar with Yukon, you may remember that in the 1960s, we had two significant mines in production, and one was the Faro mine and one was the Keno Elsa mines. Communities were quickly established to provide accommodation for mine workers and attract more people north. The mining companies sourced and erected poorly insulated kit houses from the south to meet the pressing demand for people wanting to reside in those communities. And at the same time, the Yukon government was introducing health services and public schooling in many Yukon communities. But once more, the officials relied on southern designs and construction approaches, making that the houses and buildings old and expensive to heat. In the establishment of the Yukon Legislative Assembly in 1979 led to a demand for more building infrastructure in Whitehorse during the 1980s because the newly formed government departments became more established. Construction activity was mainly government driven. And again, we relied on Southern architects to primarily design the buildings. There was a lack of capacity among government officials and construction sector to design and build structures suitable for the north. For example, we have our court building, and for those of you that have been in Whitehorse, it's a beautiful big building that is windows, floor to ceiling windows and in the roof, but it was intended to take advantage of passive solar heat. But the government officials at the time made a decision to actually have the building facing north. So there was never an opportunity to take advantage of the passive solar heat. And again, it very expensive housing to make, or a very expensive building to heat and maintain. Another example is the actual Yukon University. The building was in 1988 and the architect was from Vancouver. It's a beautiful building, bright, lots of daylight available to it. But again, it really leaks heat. It actually leaks water with snow melt in the winter, and it's very expensive to heat and maintain. Originally, the building was supposed to be heated by the state-of-the-art wood gasifier. However, nobody locally had the capacity to install or operate the system. So it was replaced by an oil-fired boiler unit when the building was commissioned. People were trying to introduce innovative building design and technologies, but the businesses and the governments in the territory at the time didn't have the capacity to modify the designs or the technologies to meet Northern specific interests. During the 1990s, the Canadian and Yukon governments felt the effects of mine closures. And so it was at that time that the Keno mine had shut down, as well as the Faro mine. And there was a recognition that really a lot of the building and housing stock across the territory really weren't suitable to our environment. And the Canadian government introduced a program called R2000, and it was to encourage people to build houses using building technologies such as heat recovery, ventilation systems, vapor barriers, thick insulation to improve energy efficiency. However, neither the government officials nor the people working in Yukon's construction sector understood the interplay among the building technologies and their effects on the integrity of buildings that they were constructing. For instance, the heat recovery ventilation systems, also known as HRVs, they're designed for airtight energy efficient housing or buildings, and they draw in fresh air inside while keeping the moisture down. But they were installed incorrectly. And many of the builders actually had the wrong size HRV unit for the size of the building that they were constructing. And it made it so that many of the HRVs didn't work. Also, homeowners didn't know how to use the HRVs. Many didn't know what they were. They had no idea about how the systems worked in airtight buildings or why they were important. And in fact, some contractors encourage people just to shut off the systems. The poor installation and the small uptake of the systems resulted in significant moisture buildup in many houses and buildings. And further, during the construction processes, sometimes the vapor barriers, the plastic that seals and protects the insulation from moisture, were installed before the subtrades had finished their work, and holes were poked through the plastic vapor barriers to finish installing plumbing or electrical systems. The holes in the vapor barriers allowed for moisture to get into the insulation, which led into dangerous mold buildup in many housing units. And it was true throughout the territory, and especially in Yukon First Nation communities, and many of the houses were condemned because of the mold. But things started to change during the early 2000s, and people began to take a more active role in making decisions about what type of housings they wanted, the types of building standards required to promote healthy, energy efficient housing. And more architects and local construction companies established businesses in the territory. The private sector took a more active role in construction of commercial buildings. And the changes stemmed from a combination of bold public policy at a municipal level and an increased understanding of the modern building technologies and their implications in the north. For example, the city of Whitehorse introduced ambitious building standards for house construction to improve the quality of housing stock in the city. Energy efficient housing standards exceeded the national code, and better standards and inspection for installation of HRVs and other energy efficient building technologies reduced the number of units that were compromised before they were ever occupied. The territorial government introduced financial incentives for builders meeting or exceeding super airtight building standards. Builders constructing houses outside of Whitehorse can also receive those financial incentives. So more houses throughout the territory are being constructed that meet or exceed the bar set by the city of Whitehorse. And there's a lot of experimentation in the design and construction practice. Trades training also began to introduce more building science concepts to apprentices to increase capacity in the construction sector to understand the interconnectivity of building systems. Yukon University developed a building maintainer program for Yukon communities to ensure that people living and working in the communities were introduced to Northern building science concepts and to strategies to improve and maintain existing housing stock. The growing capacity for innovation in Yukon's construction sector will ensure that the housing stock in the territory and new government and commercial buildings are built in the north by the Northern people to serve Northern social and economic interests. Northern businesses can access Southern expertise without losing their focus on the north. We have a lot more to do in Yukon, but the bold steps taken by governments and builders have ensured that the housing construction is increasingly designed in the north for the needs of Northern people. And Northern innovation not only improves the quality of life for those occupying those houses, but also offers rewarding employment and economic growth in our region. So that is my story of Northern innovation in the Yukon. Thank you.